What's your rank, sweetheart? Toilet cleaner?
I don't owe you an answer.
He straightened his gold trident pin. 6'2".
You don't owe me?
Dress whites sharp as a blade.
I'm a Navy SEAL. And you look like you wandered in from the parking lot.
Back off.
Or what, you'll mop me?
His crew laughed.
No badge. Publicly humiliating. No uniform. No name. Just some stray who snuck past security.
The woman at table 9 didn't move. Small, plain blazer.
Say that again.
A stray.
He leaned in. She said nothing, picked up her glass, drank, set it down without a sound, and looked straight through him. The room was silent. Then 4 four-star generals walked in, and what they did next left every soul in that ballroom frozen. Man, you have no idea how this woman ended up at that table. But trust me, you'll want to hear every word. The Grand Colonnade Hotel ballroom was built for exactly this kind of night. Crystal chandeliers throwing fractured gold across 300 guests who had collectively authorized more airstrikes than most countries had airports. The annual Defense Leadership Gala. Invitation only, egos mandatory. Generals in olive and dark blue dress uniforms stood in clusters near the bar. Admirals in white and gold moved between tables with the practiced ease of people who had spent careers turning small talk into strategy. Senators in charcoal so sharp it whispered. Defense contractors in suits that cost more than a sergeant's monthly pay smiled too wide and shook hands too long. Every chest carried ribbons. Every lapel held stars or pins or the quiet arrogance of someone who had sent men into fire and slept fine after. The air smelled like expensive cologne, polished brass, and the particular kind of ambition that only exists within 30 miles of the Pentagon. Waiters in black vests carried champagne on silver trays, the clink of crystal mixed with deep laughter and the low hum of classified conversations dressed up as small talk. A string quartet played something classical in the far corner, but nobody was listening. The real music in this room was rank. Lieutenant Bryce Whitfield owned the center of it all, not by rank, not by invitation, by presence. 29 years old, jaw like it was carved from a recruitment poster, navy dress whites so clean they glowed under the chandeliers, and pinned above his left breast pocket, a gold trident, the SEAL insignia. The thing that made colonels pause. The thing that made civilians stare. The thing Bryce touched every 11 minutes like a rosary, adjusting its angle even when it didn't need adjusting. He had earned it. He would never let you forget that. His crew orbited him like satellites. Travis Cole, stocky, sunburned, voice like gravel in a blender, stood to his right, scanning the room for stories to steal. Derek Shaw, leaner, quieter, always 2 drinks behind everyone else, leaned against a marble pillar with the kind of half-smile that said he'd already calculated every exit. They were warriors, decorated, battle-tested, and tonight they were bored. Bored men with tridents and whiskey were never a safe combination, and the whiskey was flowing like the Pentagon's discretionary budget. "Did you see her face?" Bryce said, still grinning from the encounter at table 9. He swirled his glass. "She looked at me like I insulted her ancestors." Travis snorted. "You kinda did." "I asked a question, that's all." "What's your rank?" "Simple." He took a sip. "Not my fault she couldn't answer." Derek said nothing. He glanced toward table 9. The woman was still there, still sitting, still holding that glass of water like it was the only anchor keeping her in a room she had every reason to leave. She hadn't moved, hadn't flagged a waiter, hadn't pulled out a phone to text someone for rescue. She just sat there, perfectly, impossibly still. The kind of stillness that most people never achieve, because most people have never needed to be still when everything inside them is moving. That bothered Derek more than he wanted to admit. "Bryce," he said quietly, "maybe leave it alone." "Leave what alone? I was being friendly." "You called her a stray." "I called her a stray because she looks like a stray. No uniform, no badge, no escort, in a room full of 4-stars and senators." Bryce shrugged. "I'm not wrong." Across the ballroom, Quinn Holloway set her glass down on the white tablecloth with the precision of a surgeon placing an instrument. She adjusted the cuff of her blazer, dark navy, no insignia, no decoration of any kind. Her fingers were steady. Her breathing was even. If what had just happened had rattled her, she buried it so deep that not even her pulse knew. She had been in rooms like this before. Rooms full of men who measured your worth by the metal on your chest. Rooms where silence was either weakness or strategy, and the wrong people always assumed the former. Quinn chose silence the way a sniper chooses a rooftop, not because she had nothing to say, because she had everything to say, and the patience to wait for the moment it would matter. She scanned the ballroom once. Slow, methodical, noted the exits, counted the stars, clocked the power clusters, who stood with whom, who avoided whom, whose handshake lasted a beat too long. And she noted Bryce Whitfield, still laughing, still performing, still touching that trident pin like it made him untouchable. She almost felt sorry for him. Almost. At exactly 8:47 p.m., her phone buzzed once. A single message from a number with no name. "Pemberton and the others just landed. ETA, 20 minutes. Quinn slipped the phone back into her pocket, picked up her water, and waited. She was very good at waiting. Bryce should have stopped. Any reasonable man would have. He had made his joke, got his laughs, proved whatever fragile thing he needed to prove in front of his crew. A reasonable man would have gone back to his whiskey and moved on. Bryce Whitfield was not a reasonable man. He was a man who had been told his entire adult life that he was exceptional, that the trident on his chest meant something the rest of the world couldn't touch, that the rules bent for men like him, because men like him had earned the bend. So when he saw the quiet woman at table 9 still sitting there, still unbothered, still sipping water like nothing had happened, something in his chest caught fire. It wasn't anger. It was worse. It was the feeling you get when someone refuses to be impressed by you, when your best shot lands and the target doesn't even flinch, when your presence, the thing you've spent your entire life sharpening into a weapon, means absolutely nothing to the person across the room. "She's still there," Bryce said. Travis looked up from his drink. So nobody told her to leave. Nobody even checked her credentials. In a room with 3-star security protocols. He paused. "That bothers me." "You know what bothers me?" Derek said. "You going back over there." "I'm not going back over there." He went back over there. This time, he didn't go alone. Travis followed, half curiosity, half damage control. Derek stayed behind, arms crossed, watching like a man who already knew how the movie ended. Quinn saw them coming. She didn't tense, didn't shift. She simply moved her water glass 2 inches to the left, the way someone clears space on a desk before getting down to work. Bryce pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without asking. The chair legs scraped against the marble, a sound that turned 3 nearby heads. Travis stood behind him, hands in his pockets, grinning like this was the second act of a comedy only he found funny. "So," Bryce said, "I've been thinking." "Dangerous habit," Quinn said. Travis let out a short laugh. Bryce's jaw tightened. A muscle near his temple pulsed. "Here's what I don't get." He leaned forward, elbows on the table, close enough that she could smell the whiskey.
Everyone in this room has clearance. Everyone has a rank. Everyone has a reason to be here. Except you. You're making assumptions.
Am I? Then correct me. Tell me your name. Tell me your branch. Tell me one single thing that says you didn't walk in off the street. Quinn tilted her head, studied him the way a professor studies a student who has confidently written the wrong answer on the board and is waiting for applause. Why does it matter to you? Because I earned my place here. He tapped the trident. The metal rang faintly. This cost me everything. My knees, my sleep. 3 years of my 20s I'll never get back. 2 friends I'll never see again. His voice hardened on those last words, the only real thing he'd said all night. And I don't love the idea of someone sitting in this room who hasn't paid the same price. You think everyone who belongs here paid the same price you did? I think everyone who belongs here paid a price. Period. Quinn nodded slowly. Fair enough. For a moment, Bryce thought he'd won something. That nod felt like a concession, like she was finally seeing his point. He was wrong. Let me ask you something, Lieutenant, Quinn said. Her voice hadn't changed. Same volume, same tone, but something underneath it shifted. The way the air pressure drops before a storm rolls in, so subtle you don't notice until the wind hits. Sure. When you walked over here the first time, you called me a stray. In front of 300 people. You questioned whether I belonged in this room. You measured my worth by what's on my chest, or what isn't. She paused. Do you do that to everyone? Or just the ones who don't look like you? The table went quiet. Travis stopped grinning. The color left his face in stages, like water draining from a sink. Bryce opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. That's not what It's exactly what you meant. She picked up her water. You just didn't expect me to say it out loud. Somewhere behind them, a waiter dropped a fork. The tiny sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. People at the nearest tables were watching now. Not obviously. Nobody turned their chairs. But conversations had dimmed. Eyes had shifted. The way a crowd watches a car accident without admitting they're looking. Bryce stood up. The chair scraped the marble floor. Louder this time, like even the furniture wanted distance from what was happening. Listen, he said. Lower now. Less show, more edge. I don't know who you are, but I know what I see. And what I see is someone with no credentials, no authority, and no business being at a table reserved for flag officers. Quinn looked up at him, and for the first time something flickered in her eyes. Not anger, not hurt. Something closer to pity. The kind you feel for someone about to walk off a cliff who genuinely believes they're climbing a mountain. You should go back to your friends, Lieutenant, she said quietly, before you make this worse than it already is. Bryce stared at her for 3 full seconds. Then he straightened his collar, turned, and walked back to his crew without another word. But his hands were shaking, and he couldn't figure out why. Colonel Raymond Voss found her on the terrace. He almost didn't recognize her at first. She was leaning against the stone railing, looking out at the Potomac like it owed her an explanation. The navy blazer, the low knot in her hair, the complete absence of anything that said authority. She could have been a college professor taking a smoke break at someone else's party. But Voss had served with Quinn Holloway for 12 years. He knew what calm looked like on her, and he knew what controlled fury looked like. Right now, she was somewhere between the two, balanced on the edge the way a coin balances on its rim before deciding which face to show. I heard what happened in there, he said, stepping beside her. Word travels fast. It's a room full of intelligence officers. Word is the only thing that travels. He paused. You okay? I'm fine, Ray. You're not fine. You're out here counting stars on the river, instead of in there, counting stars on chests. That's your version of not fine. A beat of silence. The river moved below them, dark and slow. Then Quinn almost smiled. Almost. He called me a stray, she said. Voss exhaled slowly. I heard a stray in the Grand Colonnade at the Defense Leadership Gala. She shook her head. 26 years of service, 3 combat tours, 214 missions over Afghanistan, 11 months writing policy that kept his teammates alive on deployments he'll never know about. And a 29-year-old lieutenant calls me a stray because I'm not wearing my ribbons. Voss didn't respond immediately. He had learned a long time ago that when Quinn Holloway was talking, the smartest thing you could do was let her finish. You remember Kandahar? She asked. Which time? The first time, 2005, when we lost the convoy. He stiffened. I remember. I pulled 3 Marines out of a burning Humvee that day. Dislocated my shoulder doing it. Burns on both hands. And when the medevac finally landed, the crew chief looked at me, looked right at me, and said, Ma'am, the landing zone's not secure. Maybe you should let the men handle this. She turned to face Voss. The terrace light caught her eyes, and for a moment they looked like they were made of something harder than flesh. I had fire on my boots, shrapnel in my arm, and a 19-year-old lance corporal bleeding out in my lap. And this kid, 6 weeks in country, wanted me to step aside because I didn't look like the person in charge. What did you do? I put him in the helicopter. The lance corporal, not the crew chief. She paused. The crew chief I dealt with later.
Voss laughed, low and quiet, the kind of laugh that comes from deep, hard-earned respect, the kind that only happens between people who have shared something that can't be explained to anyone who wasn't there. Quinn, that kid in there, Whitfield, he doesn't know who you are. Nobody in that room knows who I am tonight. That was the point. And it was. Quinn had chosen to attend the gala without her uniform, without her security detail, without the constellation of stars and ribbons that would have turned every head and made every conversation a performance of deference. She had done it on purpose, because Quinn Holloway believed something most people in power had forgotten. You learn the truth about an organization by walking through it invisible. She had been doing this for years, showing up unannounced at bases, events, ceremonies, sitting in the back, watching how people treated the person with no name tag. It was how she had uncovered a procurement scandal at Fort Campbell, how she had identified a toxic command climate at Naval Station Norfolk, how she had figured out which generals led with respect and which ones led with fear. Tonight was supposed to be another quiet observation. She hadn't planned on Bryce Whitfield. You know his team was part of the Trident 7 deployment, Voss said carefully. Quinn nodded. I signed the authorization myself. So technically, I'm the reason he has that pin. She looked back at the river. A boat moved in the distance, its lights cutting thin lines across the black water. Which makes this even more entertaining. Voss studied her profile, the sharp jaw, the steady eyes, the way she held herself like a woman who had been underestimated so many times she had turned it into a tactical advantage. What are you going to do? He asked. Nothing. Nothing? Pemberton and the others land in 12 minutes. They'll walk in. They'll see me. And then the room will figure it out on its own. Voss raised an eyebrow. That's not nothing. That's theater. No, Quinn said. Theater is wearing a gold trident and making sure everyone sees it. What I'm doing is the opposite. She turned and walked back toward the ballroom. At the glass doors, she paused, looked over her shoulder. Ray. Yeah? The kid, Whitfield. His father served under me. Petty Officer First Class Thomas Whitfield. Good man, quiet, never needed a room to know his name. She held Voss's gaze. I hope the son learns what the father already knew.
Then she disappeared through the doors. Voss stood on the terrace alone. He took a sip of his bourbon, shook his head. God help that boy, he muttered. Bryce was on his fourth whiskey when things got worse. Not worse in the way that breaks bones. Worse in the way that builds pressure behind a dam. Slow, invisible, and catastrophic the moment someone puts one more crack in the wall. He had gone back to his crew after the second confrontation with Quinn. Travis had handed him a drink without a word. Derek had given him a look, the one that said, I told you so, without wasting the breath. And for about 10 minutes, Bryce had let it go. Or tried to. But the whiskey was warm, and the gala was loud, and the room was full of people who outranked him, which always made Bryce feel like a dog on a short leash. He compensated the way he always did, by finding someone he could look down on. You know what gets me, he said, loud enough for the tables nearby to hear. She's still in there, just sitting, like she owns the place. Bryce, Travis started. No, seriously, 3-star security, name-checked guest list. And this woman walks in, wearing a blazer from a department store, and nobody says a word? A major at the next table, Ellen Crawford, Army, sharp-eyed and 15 years deep into a career built on precision, turned in her chair. Lieutenant, maybe lower the volume. With all due respect, ma'am, I'm making a point. You're making a scene. There's a difference. And in my experience, the people who can't tell the difference are usually the ones who end up on the wrong side of a review board. Bryce blinked, but he didn't back down. Men like Bryce never back down from women who outrank them. It was, in fact, the specific blind spot that had brought him to this moment in the first place. The difference is that I'm the only one in this room with the guts to say what everyone's thinking. Crawford's expression didn't change, but her posture did. A subtle straightening, the kind of micro-adjustment that career officers develop when they're filing something away for later. She had seen men like Bryce before, talented, dangerous, and completely blind to the moment their confidence crossed the line into self-destruction. She turned back to her table without another word. Some fires, she had learned, you let burn until the person holding the match figures out they're standing in gasoline. Bryce ignored her. He stood up, glass in hand, and turned to face a wider audience. 4 tables, maybe 30 people. Enough. Am I the only one who thinks it's a problem? He said. We have protocols. We have clearance levels. We have a chain of command that exists for a reason. And we're all just going to sit here while someone with no credentials, no rank, no branch, no nothing, sits at a flag officer's table like she's one of us? Silence. Not the good kind. Not the kind that meant people agreed. The kind that meant people were calculating how far away from this man they needed to be when the blast went off. Travis leaned over to Derek. He's not stopping. Nope. Should we do something? He's a grown man, Travis. Let him dig. And dig Bryce did. Because that was the thing about Bryce Whitfield. He wasn't wrong about security protocols. He wasn't even wrong that someone without visible credentials at a defense gala was unusual. What he was wrong about, catastrophically, irreversibly wrong about, was the conclusion he had drawn from those facts. He had looked at Quinn Holloway and seen absence. No uniform, no stars, no authority. He had measured her by the blankness of her chest and decided she was nothing. He never considered that the most powerful people in certain rooms are the ones who don't need to advertise. I served 3 deployments, he continued, voice carrying across the nearest cluster of tables. I've been shot at in 4 countries. I earned every inch of this uniform, and I refuse to pretend that everyone in this room can say the same. Travis grabbed his arm. Sit down. Get off me. Bryce, sit down. Why? Because some woman I've never heard of might get her feelings hurt? He pulled his arm free. If she belongs here, she can prove it. If she can't, she should leave. Quinn, meanwhile, had re-entered the ballroom. She stood near the east wall, half hidden behind a pillar, watching Bryce's performance with the detached interest of someone observing a lab experiment whose hypothesis had already been confirmed. She wasn't angry. She had been angry once, years ago, the first time a man in uniform had questioned her right to be in a room. That anger had burned hot and fast and taught her nothing except that fire without direction just burns the person holding it. What she felt now was closer to curiosity. How far would he go? How deep would he dig before he realized the hole was a grave? She checked her phone. One new message. Motorcade is 5 minutes out. 5 minutes. She slipped the phone into her pocket and allowed herself one small, private smile, the kind that never reaches the eyes, the kind that lives entirely in the muscles around the mouth and means something only the person smiling understands. 5 minutes until the room rearranged itself. 5 minutes until every assumption Bryce Whitfield had made about power, authority, and the quiet woman at table 9 came apart at the seams. A waiter passed. Quinn took a fresh glass of water from his tray. She held it up to the light for a moment, watching the chandelier refract through the liquid into tiny, scattered stars. Then she drank and waited. She was very good at waiting. Nah, hold on. Imagine you're sitting there, minding your business, and some dude with a pin on his chest walks up and calls you a stray in front of 300 people, and nobody says a word. You'd be shaking. But she smiled. That's terrifying. The doors opened at exactly 9:14 p.m. Not the side doors that the waiters used, not the service entrance near the kitchen. The main doors. The ones with the brass handles, polished to a mirror shine, and the 2 Marine sentries who had been standing at parade rest all evening like statues carved from duty. Both Marines snapped to attention simultaneously. Their heels hit the marble floor with a crack that echoed across the ballroom like a starting pistol. Every conversation within 30 feet died mid-sentence. Glasses froze halfway to lips. A senator stopped laughing. A contractor stopped lying. The string quartet played 2 more notes before the cellist looked up and the music stumbled into silence. General Arthur Pemberton walked in first. United States Army. 4 stars. 61 years old. Built like a man who had never missed a morning run in 4 decades. His dress uniform carried so many ribbons it looked like a stained glass window compressed into 3 inches of fabric. He moved with the kind of deliberate gravity that said everything in this room now operated on his timeline. Behind him, Admiral James Whitmore, United States Navy, 4 stars, silver-haired, lean, eyes like polished steel. The kind of man who had ended more naval careers with a single memorandum than most officers had ended with an entire command tour. Bryce's entire chain of command, every link, every star, every signature, led back to this man. Then, General Diane Solis, United States Air Force, 4 stars. The first woman to command a combatant command. She walked like someone who had spent 30 years being the only woman in every room and had long since stopped noticing. And finally, General Craig Belmont, United States Marine Corps, 4 stars. Hands like catcher's mitts. A face that looked like it had been carved by committee and approved by no one. He didn't walk into rooms. He occupied them, the way weather occupies a landscape. Completely. without apology. 4 four-star generals. 16 stars total. The combined authority in that entrance could have launched a war, ended a career, or reclassified a continent. All before dessert. The ballroom responded the way ballrooms respond to that kind of power. People stood. Glasses were set down. Conversations didn't just stop. They were abandoned, mid-word, like evacuated buildings. Even the air seemed to tighten, as if the room itself had drawn a breath and was holding it. Bryce stood too. Instinct. Every military bone in his body pulled him to his feet before his brain caught up. He straightened his whites, touched his trident. For one brief, shining moment, he felt what he always felt when senior brass entered a room. A mix of reverence and the electric certainty that one day men would stand like this for him. That certainty had about 90 seconds left to live. Pemberton scanned the room. His eyes moved across the tables with the efficiency of a man who had spent his entire career reading rooms the way most people read newspapers. He noted the senators, noted the contractors, noted the junior officers standing at various stages of rigid attention. Then his eyes found Quinn. She was standing near the east wall, plain blazer, water glass in hand. No stars, no ribbons, no name tag. The same woman Bryce had called a stray 40 minutes ago. Pemberton stopped walking. For a man who had commanded 200,000 troops across 3 theaters of war, Arthur Pemberton did not stop walking for many people. He stopped for the president. He stopped for the Secretary of Defense. And he stopped for exactly one other person. He drew himself to full height, shoulders back, chin up, and he saluted. Not the casual half salute that generals sometimes gave at social events, a full, crisp, textbook salute. The kind that enlisted men practice in boot camp until their arms ache. "Madam Deputy Secretary," he said, voice clear, voice loud, loud enough for every table within 50 feet to hear. "We didn't expect you this early." The room did not gasp. What they did was worse. They went silent. Completely, absolutely, cellularly silent. The kind of silence where you can hear the champagne bubbles popping in someone's glass 3 tables over. The kind of silence that has weight. Admiral Whitmore saw Pemberton's salute and followed. Crisp, immediate, no hesitation. General Solis, same. General Belmont, same. 4 four-star generals, standing at attention. Saluting a woman in a plain navy blazer who had spent the last hour being mocked by a lieutenant for not belonging. Quinn returned the salute with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 10,000 times. "At ease, gentlemen. Diane?" A small nod to Solis. "This is a gala, not a formation." They relaxed, but the damage was done. The word traveled through the ballroom like voltage through water. Deputy Secretary of Defense, Quinn Holloway, the woman at table 9, the woman with no uniform, the woman the Navy SEAL had called a stray. She was the Deputy Secretary of Defense. Third in the civilian chain of command at the Pentagon. Direct authority over every uniformed service member in the room. Direct authority over every general who had just saluted her. Direct authority over every SEAL team, every carrier group, every combat division in the United States military, including, especially, devastatingly including, Lieutenant Bryce Whitfield. Bryce didn't move. He couldn't. His body had locked in place the way bodies do when the brain receives information it cannot process. His face went white. Not pale. White. The color of paper. The color of surrender. The color of a man watching his entire identity collapse in real time. The whiskey glass in his right hand trembled. A single drop of amber liquid crested the rim and slid down the crystal onto his thumb. He didn't feel it. He couldn't feel anything except the floor opening beneath him. Travis was behind him, close enough to whisper, "Bryce." Nothing. "Bryce." Nothing. His eyes were locked on Quinn, on the generals, on the salutes, on the impossible reality of what he had done. Derek appeared at his other side. "Don't move, don't speak, don't even breathe wrong." Across the room, Quinn was shaking hands with Pemberton, exchanging words with Whitmore, smiling at something Solis said. She moved through the cluster of generals with the ease of someone walking through her own living room. She didn't look at Bryce. She didn't need to. Every person in that ballroom was already doing the math. The seal, the stray comment, the woman who turned out to be the second highest-ranking civilian in the entire Department of Defense. Major Ellen Crawford, still seated at her table, lifted her wine glass. She took a slow, deliberate sip, and she allowed herself the smallest, most private smile she had worn in years. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't need to. The room said it for her. Quinn took the podium at 9:32 p.m. She didn't rush, didn't stride. She walked to the microphone with the unhurried pace of a woman who had addressed joint committees, NATO summits, and rooms full of people who controlled nuclear arsenals. A gala ballroom was, by comparison, a Tuesday. She adjusted the microphone, looked out at 300 faces, and waited. The silence was already there. She just let it deepen. "Good evening," she said. "For those who don't know me, and apparently some of you don't, my name is Quinn Holloway, Deputy Secretary of Defense." A ripple. Not laughter, not applause. Something between recognition and dread, depending on where you were sitting. "I wasn't planning to speak tonight. I came to listen, to observe, to see how this community carries itself when it thinks no one important is watching." She paused. "I learned a great deal." She did not look at Bryce. She didn't need to. Every pair of eyes in the room was doing that job for her. "I want to talk about something simple," she continued. "Respect. Not the kind that comes from rank. Not the kind you earn in a classroom or a combat zone. The kind you give to another human being before you know their name, before you know their title, before you know whether they can do something for you or to you." Her voice was steady, warm even. There was no venom in it, no sarcasm, no subtext aimed at any specific lieutenant standing near the bar with a face the color of ash. And that was what made it devastating. It wasn't an attack. It was a lesson. And lessons, unlike attacks, leave marks that don't heal. "We are the most powerful military on Earth," she said. "Our strength is not in our weapons. It's not in our technology. It's in our people. And we lose that strength. We lose everything the moment we start deciding who belongs based on what they look like instead of what they've done." She let that settle. 10 seconds. 15. Long enough for it to reach every corner of the room and every conscience that needed reaching. "Thank you for your service. All of you. Enjoy the evening." She stepped back from the podium. The applause was immediate, sustained, and carried the particular intensity of people clapping as much for themselves as for the speaker. The applause of a room trying to prove it was on the right side. Quinn descended the 3 steps from the stage. Pemberton met her at the bottom with a handshake that became a brief, respectful nod. Whitmore was next, then Solis, then Belmont, a receiving line that hadn't been planned but formed anyway, because 4-star generals know instinctively when protocol demands itself. And then Admiral Whitmore excused himself from the cluster. He straightened his uniform, set his jaw, and walked directly toward the bar where Bryce Whitfield stood frozen between Travis Cole and Derek Shaw, like a man waiting for his own execution.
Lieutenant Whitfield! Bryce snapped to attention so fast his heels cracked the floor. Sir! Outside! Now!
The hallway was long, marble-floored, and lit by wall sconces that threw soft yellow light across portraits of former secretaries of defense. It was the kind of hallway where careers went to die quietly. Whitmore stood with his back to the portraits, arms behind him, feet shoulder-width apart. The posture of a man who had delivered bad news to presidents and wasn't about to soften his approach for a lieutenant. Do you know what you did tonight? Sir, That's not a rhetorical question, Lieutenant. Do you understand what you did?
Bryce's throat worked. I disrespected a senior official, sir. You disrespected the Deputy Secretary of Defense to her face in front of 4 combatant commanders at the highest-profile military social event of the year. Whitmore's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Each word landed with the precision of a guided munition. You called her a stray. Bryce said nothing.
I've commanded SEALs for 22 years, Whitmore continued. I've seen operators survive things that would break most men. I've also seen operators destroy their own careers in a single evening because they confused arrogance with confidence. He paused. Which one are you, Lieutenant? Bryce's eyes were fixed on a point 6 inches above Whitmore's left shoulder. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles in his temples pulsed. I asked you a question. I made a mistake, sir. You made a catastrophic error in judgment. There is a difference. Whitmore took one step closer. There will be a formal review. Your commanding officer will be notified. Your team leader will be notified. This will be documented. Yes, sir. And you will write a formal letter of apology to the Deputy Secretary. Not an email, a letter, hand-delivered, through my office. Yes, sir. Whitmore studied him for a long moment, looking for something. Contrition, maybe, or the first crack in the armor of a young man who had built his entire identity around being untouchable. Your trident doesn't make you special, Whitfield. It makes you accountable. There is a very large difference. And if you can't learn that difference, no pin on your chest will save your career. He turned and walked back toward the ballroom. His footsteps echoed down the marble hallway, steady, measured, fading. Bryce stood alone. The portraits on the wall stared down at him. Men and women who had held the office that Quinn Holloway now held. Men and women who had shaped wars, ended conflicts, rebuilt nations. He looked down at his trident. The gold caught the sconce light and glowed. For the first time in his career, it felt heavy. Outside the hallway, pressed against the wall where the marble met the corner, Travis Cole stood with his arms crossed. He had heard everything. His face was the color of old paper. His lips were pressed into a line so thin they had nearly disappeared. He didn't say a word when Bryce finally walked out. He didn't need to. Some silences say everything. The knock came at 10:17 p.m. Quinn was in a private room on the second floor of the hotel. A small space, leather chairs, a mahogany desk, a window overlooking the Potomac. The kind of room that hotels keep for guests who need silence more than luxury. She was reviewing notes on her tablet. Tomorrow's briefing at the Pentagon. Force readiness numbers. A drone procurement contract that smelled wrong. The gala was already fading into the background noise of her schedule. One event among hundreds. One evening among years of evenings spent in rooms where men underestimated her. The knock came again. Firmer this time, but hesitant in the spaces between. The rhythm of someone who wanted to be heard, but wasn't sure they wanted to be let in. "Come in," Quinn said. The door opened. Bryce Whitfield stepped through. He was still in his dress whites, but they didn't look the same. The fabric hadn't changed. The trident was still there. The creases were still sharp, but something underneath all of it had shifted. The way a building looks different after an earthquake.
still standing, but you can see the cracks if you know where to look. He stopped 3 paces from the desk, drew himself to attention, and saluted.
Not the way he had saluted earlier in the evening, casually, reflexively, the muscle memory of a man who had done it 10,000 times without thinking. This salute was different. This one was conscious, deliberate. The salute of a man who was choosing, for the first time, to mean it. Madam Deputy Secretary.
Quinn looked at him. She didn't stand, didn't return the salute immediately. She let him hold it for 3 seconds, long enough for the weight of his arm to become the weight of everything that had happened that night. Then she returned it. "At ease, Lieutenant." He dropped his hand, but he didn't relax. His body stayed rigid. His eyes stayed fixed on the wall behind her. "Sit down, Whitfield." He sat. The leather chair creaked under him. His hands went to his knees. He gripped them hard enough to whiten his knuckles. Silence. Quinn let it stretch. She had learned, decades ago, that silence was the most effective interrogation tool ever invented. Not because it made people uncomfortable, though it did. Because it made people honest. Given enough silence, most people will fill it with the truth, if only to make the quiet stop. Bryce broke at the 30-second mark.
"Ma'am, I owe you an apology." "Yes, you do. What I said tonight, at the table, in front of everyone, it was wrong. It was disrespectful. It was beneath the standard of the uniform I wear and the community I represent. And I am deeply, sincerely sorry." The words came out in a rush, rehearsed, polished, the kind of apology a man writes in his head while staring at his shoes in a hallway, editing each sentence until it sounds right. Quinn heard it. All of it. And then she did something Bryce did not expect. She ignored it. "Why did you join the Navy?" she asked. Bryce blinked. "Ma'am?" "The Navy. Why did you join?" The question knocked him sideways. He had walked in prepared for punishment, for a lecture, for the cold, surgical dismantling of his career that admirals delivered in marble hallways. He had not prepared for a conversation. He stopped, started again. "My family didn't have much, ma'am. Small town in Virginia. My father was enlisted. Petty officer first class. He served 20 years and came home with a bad knee and a flag in a shadow box." He paused. "I wanted to be more than that." "More than what?" "More than a man nobody noticed." The words hung in the air between them, raw, unscripted. The first honest thing Bryce Whitfield had said all evening. Quinn's expression didn't change. But something behind her eyes softened. Not pity, not sympathy, but recognition. The look of someone who had heard a version of that sentence in her own voice, in her own past, in her own small town, where nobody expected her to become anything at all. "Your father," she said. "Thomas Whitfield." Bryce's head snapped up. "You knew my father?" "He served under my command, 15 years ago. Naval Station Rota, Spain. He was part of my logistics support team during the Mediterranean deployment." Bryce stared. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "He was a good man," Quinn continued. "Quiet. Never asked for recognition. Never needed the room to know his name to do his job. He just showed up, every day, did the work, earned the respect of everyone around him, not because of what he wore, but because of how he carried himself." She leaned forward slightly. "That's the difference, Lieutenant. Your father never needed a trident to command respect. He just was respectable. Quietly, consistently, without performing it for an audience." Bryce's eyes were red. Not crying, not yet, but the pressure was there, building behind the surface like water behind glass. "I'm not going to destroy your career," Quinn said. "Admiral Whitmore's formal review will proceed. There will be consequences. That's non-negotiable. Actions have weight, and tonight your actions were heavy." She paused. But I'm not going to request additional disciplinary action. I'm not going to make a phone call that ends your career before you've had a chance to learn from this. Why? His voice cracked on the word. Because your father earned that grace. And because I believe, I have to believe, that the son of Thomas Whitfield is capable of becoming the kind of man his father already was. She stood, extended her hand. Bryce looked at it. Then he stood, took it, and shook it. His grip was firm, but his hand trembled. One more thing, Quinn said, still holding his hand. Ma'am? Rank doesn't make you dangerous, Lieutenant. She released his hand. Silence does. Learn to use it. Bryce nodded. He couldn't speak. He turned, walked to the door, and opened it. In the doorway, he paused. Didn't look back, but his shoulders, the shoulders that had carried the weight of a trident all evening like it was a crown, straightened in a way they hadn't before. Not with arrogance, with something older, something quieter, something his father would have recognized. He stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind him. 6 months later, Bryce Whitfield stood on the deck of the USS Baton, watching the Atlantic stretch out like a gray, endless promise. He was thinner, not in a bad way, in the way men get when they stop performing and start working. The kind of weight loss that happens from the inside out. The formal review had left its mark. A letter of reprimand in his permanent file. Reassignment from his SEAL team to a support role aboard the amphibious assault ship. No demotion. Quinn had kept her word. But the lateral move carried its own gravity. Everyone who mattered knew why he was there. And everyone who didn't would find out eventually. He didn't fight it. Travis had expected him to rage, to lawyer up, to burn every bridge between Norfolk and the Pentagon. Instead, Bryce had read the paperwork, signed it, and reported to the Baton without a single phone call. You good? Travis had asked the night before he shipped out. No, Bryce had said, but I will be. Aboard the ship, he was different. He listened more than he spoke, asked questions instead of giving answers. When junior sailors made mistakes, he corrected them with patience instead of performance. The men noticed within the first week. Something had shifted behind his eyes. Something quiet, something steady, something that hadn't been there before. He kept a photograph in his rack, faded at the edges. His father, Thomas Whitfield, Petty Officer First Class, standing on a pier in Spain. Next to him, a young officer, a woman. Her face was younger, her hair darker, but the posture was unmistakable. Quinn Holloway, 20 years ago. His father had never mentioned her, never dropped her name to impress anyone, never used the connection to advance his career or his son's. He had simply served, done his job, and gone home. Bryce looked at that photograph every morning, and every morning he understood his father a little better. 6 months and 4 days after the gala, Bryce sat down at a metal desk in his quarters and wrote a letter. Not the formal apology Whitmore had ordered. That was done months ago, hand-delivered through the Admiral's office as instructed. This one was voluntary. Dear Deputy Secretary Holloway, you told me that rank doesn't make you dangerous. Silence does. I've spent 6 months learning what that means. I'm not done yet. But I wanted you to know. I'm listening now. Respectfully, Lieutenant Bryce Whitfield. He sealed it, addressed it, and set it on the outgoing mail stack without telling anyone. 3 weeks later, a reply arrived through official channels. No letterhead, no signature block, just a handwritten note on plain white paper. Your father would be proud. Keep going. Bryce read it once, folded it, and placed it in the frame next to the photograph from Spain. In a room full of stars and stripes, the most powerful person had worn no uniform at all. And the loudest man in the room had finally learned the value of silence. Man, imagine being so loud your whole life that you never once stopped to listen. And then one quiet woman in a plain blazer teaches you what real power sounds like. Nothing. Silence. That's it. That's the whole lesson.